Some people enter your life like thieves in the night, desperate, broken, looking for a way out of their own misery. You were their light in the abyss, a warm fire in their eternal winter, and they clung to you like a drowning man to driftwood. At first, it felt like purpose, like fate had carved out a role just for you, to save, to heal, to be the answer they never found anywhere else. But then, like a spider lacing its web, their needs wrapped around your limbs, their burdens coiled around your throat. And before you knew it, your life wasn't your own anymore. At first, the weight of them seemed bearable. Love, after all, demands sacrifice. Or at least, that's what the poets preach. So you handed over your time, your peace, your very identity, brick by brick, constructing a fortress around them, shielding them from the winds of their own destruction. But there's something about human nature, isn't there? Give someone a home, and they'll rip up the floorboards. Hand them your heart, and watch them poke holes in it, just to see if it still beats. You thought you were saving them, but the truth was far crueler. You were merely giving them a place to hide from their own demons. You became the addiction, the sedative, the perfect distraction. Every time life knocked them down, they ran to you, whispering sweet little apologies in between crises. And you obliged. Every single time. Because at some point, their chaos became the only rhythm you knew. The fire they brought into your life became a warmth you mistook for love. Then, the shift. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the hands that once reached for you in desperation started gripping tighter. The gratitude became entitlement. The need turned into demand. Your world shrank. Your choices eroded. Until all that remained was them. The escape they sought had turned into your prison. And the worst part, the walls weren't built with chains or locks. No, they were made of whispers, of expectations, of the unspoken rule that you had no right to leave. Because who were you without them? The tragedy of the captive is that they often hold the key, but fear what lies beyond the door. After all, there is a comfort in captivity, a twisted security in knowing exactly what each day will bring, even if it's misery. The world outside is wild, uncertain. It does not need you like they do. It does not beg or plead or make you feel indispensable. And yet, beyond the bars, there is something you have long forgotten: the weightlessness of freedom. There's a certain art to reclaiming oneself. It is not loud. It does not come with grand declarations or cinematic exits. No, true liberation is quieter. It is found in the smallest of refusals, the texts left unanswered, the calls ignored, the realization that you are not obligated to be the foundation upon which another builds their survival. The moment you understand this, truly understand it, the prison begins to crumble. They will resist, of course. Oh, the performances will be grand. Tears like shattered glass. Promises like fading echoes. They will swear they've changed, that they see the error of their ways. And for a moment, you might even believe them. Because hope is a stubborn creature, and the heart is far too easily fooled. But look closer. This isn't transformation. It's desperation. Not for you, but for the comfort of knowing someone else will suffer in their place. There comes a time when every captive must decide: remain in the comfort of a familiar hell, or step into the unknown abyss of freedom. It will not be easy. The chains may not be physical, but they are no less real. The mind will scream, the hands will tremble, the heart will hesitate. But on the other side, beyond the fear, beyond the chaos, there is something worth fighting for: yourself. Freedom is a dangerous thing to those who fear abandonment. When you became their safe place, their solid ground, their guiding light, you unknowingly signed a contract, a silent, binding agreement that you would never leave, never falter, never demand space of your own. At first, it felt noble. The way they leaned on you, how their world seemed to stabilize in your presence, the gratitude in their eyes when life got too heavy, and you carried some of their weight. But then, something changed. The gratitude faded, replaced by expectation. You were no longer a gift in their life, but a necessity, like oxygen, like gravity, something they had no intention of ever losing. And so, they started to clip your wings. Not openly, not with words, but with small, seemingly innocent gestures. A subtle guilt trip when you made plans without them. A passive-aggressive sigh when you pursued something for yourself. The way they made their problems just urgent enough to derail your own ambitions. Their fears just crippling enough that you had no choice but to reassure them. Again and again and again. Suddenly, your life was no longer your own. Your choices filtered through the lens of their comfort. Your desires postponed for their well-being. You were free in theory, but caged in practice. The cruelest prisons have no walls, no bars, no locks. Only invisible chains woven from dependence, wrapped around your every move, tightening whenever you dared to reach for more. And the most tragic part? They didn't even do it maliciously. No villainous schemes, no calculated plans to keep you trapped. Just the quiet, desperate terror of someone who cannot stand to lose their anchor. And so, they hold tighter and tighter until the only way to breathe is to cut yourself free. There's a certain high that comes from being the one who saves. It starts innocently enough. You see someone struggling, someone lost, someone with wounds they don't know how to heal, and you step in. You offer them comfort, a sense of stability they've never known. At first, they seem grateful, almost reverent. Their world is chaotic, but you bring them calm. Their life is spiraling, but you pull them back from the edge. And so, you start to believe that maybe this is your role in life. To fix, to heal, to bear the weight they cannot carry alone. It feels noble, even necessary, until you realize that every time they fall, you are the one expected to pick them up. The cycle begins, slow and unassuming. Every problem they face, you have an answer for. Every time they falter, you are there to catch them. They grow dependent, but it doesn't feel like dependence at first. It feels like trust, like connection. But beneath the surface, something insidious is happening. The more you give, the less they try. The more you fix, the more they break. And not by accident. No, somewhere deep down, they have learned that as long as they remain broken, you will remain by their side. Your presence is tied to their suffering. Your loyalty secured by their fragility. You convince yourself that they just need time, that with enough patience, enough effort, they will learn to stand on their own. But days turn to weeks, weeks to years, and still, they lean on you like a crutch they refuse to discard. You begin to notice the subtle patterns, the way their crises always seem to arise when you try to focus on yourself, the way they withhold affection the moment you express exhaustion. Their needs are urgent, endless, devouring every ounce of energy you have, yet somehow, they never reciprocate. Your exhaustion is inconvenient to them. Your boundaries are met with guilt, manipulation, or worse, silence. And then comes the resentment. The slow-burning realization that you have spent so long building them up, that you've neglected yourself entirely, that while you were patching up their wounds, yours have been festering. You've sacrificed sleep, peace, your own ambitions, all in the name of saving someone who was never interested in saving themselves. You begin to wonder, was it ever about love? Or were you simply a tool, a means to an end? Because love should not feel like servitude. Connection should not feel like captivity. But here's the worst part. By the time you wake up to the truth, the cycle has already ensnared you. You have become the role you played. You don't know how to stop. Because stopping means facing a truth you've been avoiding. If you are not their savior, then who are you? If they don't need you, then what is left of this relationship? You built your identity around being the one who could fix things, and now you are terrified of what happens when you stop. The real tragedy is that they were never powerless. They had the ability to grow, to heal, to take control of their own life. But why would they, when they could just use yours? The longer you stay, the more you enable. The more you enable, the deeper you sink. You are not a person to them. You are a service, an endless well of reassurance and sacrifice. And when the well runs dry, they will not mourn you. They will simply move on to the next source of supply. So, what now? Do you continue the cycle, feeding a dynamic that will never serve you? Or do you finally sever the tie and face the discomfort of reclaiming yourself? It won't be easy. The guilt will claw at you. The fear will whisper that without you, they will fall apart. But ask yourself, whose responsibility is that? You were never meant to carry the weight of someone else's life at the cost of your own. If they refuse to take accountability for their own growth, then let them crumble. Some people need to fall to learn how to stand, and if you truly love them, you will let them. It always begins with a simple act of kindness. You see someone drowning, their world unraveling, their voice breaking under the weight of life's cruelty, and something inside you tells you that you must help. Not because you have to, but because you want to. It feels good to be needed, to be the one who can steady the storm. But storms don't like to be tamed, and before you know it, the rescue mission turns into a full-time job. What was once voluntary starts to feel like an unspoken agreement. You become their emergency contact for every crisis, their emotional support system, their personal therapist. You rationalize it. After all, they've been through so much. They just need time. They just need patience. They just need you. And so, you keep giving, keep stretching, keep sacrificing. The lines blur. Their problems become your problems. Their pain becomes your burden. Their survival depends on you. And the moment you consider stepping away, guilt creeps in like a shadow, whispering that leaving would make you heartless. The weight grows heavier, but you don't complain. You tell yourself this is what love, what friendship, what loyalty looks like. And yet, something has shifted. Their gratitude has faded into expectation. What was once a favor is now a duty. The very things you once did out of care are now demanded as if they are owed. If you dare to say no, they do not hear it as a boundary. They hear it as betrayal. How dare you put yourself first? How dare you take time for yourself? And so, obligation seeps in like poison. You are no longer acting out of kindness, but out of duty. The thought of ignoring their calls makes your stomach churn. The idea of setting boundaries feels cruel. You have been trained, conditioned to respond at the first sign of distress, to drop everything at a moment's notice. But here's the truth. This was never just about them. It was about control. Control over you, over your time, over your emotions. Because as long as they keep you invested in their chaos, you will never have the time to focus on your own life. Resentment is a slow burn. It starts as exhaustion, as a quiet irritation you push to the back of your mind. But over time, it builds. The late-night emotional breakdowns you are forced to navigate, the way they dismiss your own struggles, because theirs are always more urgent. The suffocating realization that you have spent so long tending to someone else's garden that your own has withered. And that's when the anger comes, not at them, but at yourself. Because deep down, you knew. You knew the moment compassion turned into expectation, the moment obligation replaced gratitude. But you stayed anyway. This is where the prison is built. Not with walls, not with chains, but with invisible strings, tied to guilt, to promises, to the fear of what will happen if you walk away. You wonder if you are being selfish, if cutting them off would make you a bad person. But ask yourself this: when was the last time they considered your needs? When was the last time they checked in on you without needing something in return? You were never a person to them. You were a solution, a crutch, an escape. But you are not an escape. You are not a lifeboat. You are not a punching bag for their unresolved wounds. If they truly valued you, they would want you free, not bound. They would want you happy, not exhausted. True love, true connection, does not come at the cost of your own well-being. Connection should be a bridge, not a cage. In its purest form, it should elevate, strengthen, and inspire growth. But when one person is forced to shrink so the other can feel secure, what remains is not connection. It's a slow suffocation. You thought you were building something meaningful, something strong, something worth fighting for. You mistook sacrifice for devotion, compromise for love. But love should never feel like an obligation, and connection should never demand the erasure of self. You didn't notice it at first, the way their needs overshadowed your own. It began in subtle ways, small sacrifices, harmless compromises, moments where you silenced your own desires for the sake of harmony. And then, harmony became the excuse for their comfort. Your dreams, a distraction. Your needs, an inconvenience. The moment you voiced them, the moment you asserted yourself, the peace they claimed to want so badly cracked, revealing the real foundation of your relationship. Control masked as dependence. True connection is not one person endlessly pouring while the other drinks without restraint. It is not one person shouldering the burdens of two while the other coasts in the illusion of balance. You were never meant to be the sole source of stability, the fixer, the provider of endless comfort at the cost of your own well-being. The moment connection becomes a transaction where one gives and the other simply takes, it is no longer connection. It is quiet servitude. You used to feel seen. Now, you feel used. You used to feel valued. Now, you feel drained. What was once a relationship now resembles a contract you never signed, a job you never applied for. Somewhere along the way, you stopped existing as an individual and became a function, a role, a lifeline for someone unwilling to stand on their own. And when you try to reclaim yourself, they call it selfishness. They call it betrayal. Because the comfort they've grown accustomed to was built on the erosion of your boundaries. But here's what they don't tell you. Real love does not require you to disappear. It does not ask for submission, disguised as sacrifice. If someone truly values you, they will not clip your wings to keep you close. They will not guilt you into staying small so they can feel big. Love is not meant to be a weight around your ankles. If you cannot grow within it, it is not love. If it demands your exhaustion, it is not love. Somewhere, deep inside, you know this. You feel the tension, the exhaustion, the quiet resentment building with each passing day. You tell yourself that they don't mean to take so much, that they don't see what they're doing. Maybe you even believe that love means enduring this weight forever. But let's be honest. If they truly cared, would they let you drown? Would they expect you to keep giving until there's nothing left? Or would they hold space for you to breathe, to expand, to be something more than a constant source of comfort? There's a difference between someone who wants to grow and someone who just wants a caretaker. You've met both, but only one has ever kept you trapped. They came to you under the guise of struggle, weaving stories of hardship, wounds that never healed, pain that only you could possibly understand. And you fell for it. Not because you were naive, but because you believed in the power of support. You believed that love, friendship, or loyalty meant showing up, holding space, and offering what you could. But not everyone seeks support to stand on their own. Some just want a permanent place to collapse. At first, it seemed innocent. They confided in you, shared their scars, let you in on the parts of themselves that others had ignored. It felt special, being the one person who could see behind their mask. But what you didn't see was that the mask was never meant to come off. It was meant to lure you in, to get you invested, to make you believe that without your presence, they might shatter completely. And the moment you accepted that unspoken responsibility, you became something else entirely. Not a friend, not a partner, not an equal. You became their handler. A handler does not get to have needs. A handler does not get to be exhausted. A handler exists solely to manage, soothe, regulate. Your emotions became secondary, your boundaries a mere suggestion. They built their comfort on your exhaustion, their stability on your sacrifice. And every time you thought about stepping back, they had a way of pulling you in again. A crisis, a breakdown, a well-timed moment of vulnerability. Not because they needed help, but because they needed control. Control over you. Control over the one person who was willing to make them the center of their world. You started to notice the patterns, the way they always seemed to struggle most when you tried to focus on yourself. The way their apologies never came with real change. The way their gratitude was always short-lived, vanishing the moment you weren't available at their every beck and call. You gave and gave, thinking that maybe this time they would see your worth. Maybe this time they would appreciate what you did, but they never did. Because appreciation was never the goal. Dependence was. Some people don't want to heal. They don't want to grow, improve, or take accountability for their lives. They just want someone to carry the weight for them. They want someone to absorb the consequences of their choices. Someone to shield them from discomfort. Someone to place between themselves and reality, so they never have to face it alone. And the more you accommodate, the more they demand. The more you give, the more they take. Until one day, you wake up and realize that your life revolves entirely around someone else's chaos. And here's the cruel part. The moment you stop playing your role, they will find someone else to replace you. They will seek out another handler, another caretaker, another person who is willing to believe that they just need one more chance to get their life together. They will call you selfish, heartless, cruel, because how dare you stop serving them? How dare you put yourself first? But look closer. If they truly valued you, would they have ever put you in this position to begin with? Love, respect, friendship. These things are supposed to be reciprocal. They are supposed to lift, to encourage, to inspire. If your presence in someone's life only enables them to stay stagnant, if your existence is only tolerated so long as you continue to sacrifice, then what you have is not a relationship. It's an arrangement, and not one that benefits you. You thought you were pulling them out of the darkness. You saw their pain, their struggles, the way they reached for you with trembling hands, and you believed, foolishly, perhaps, that they wanted to be saved, that they wanted something better, that they just needed a little help, a little light, a little love. And so, you gave it, without hesitation, without question. You threw yourself into the fire, believing that if you burned bright enough, it would be enough to guide them home. But some people don't want to be saved. They don't want to heal. They don't want to climb. They don't want to fight their way out of the pit they've dug for themselves. No, what they really want is company. They want someone to sit beside them in their suffering, someone to validate their misery, someone to share in the weight of their own self-destruction. And the moment you realize this, the moment you try to pull away, the moment you suggest that maybe, just maybe, they could try standing on their own, the claws come out. It starts with subtle resistance, the excuses, the self-pity, the countless reasons why nothing can ever change. You don't understand, they say. It's not that easy. And at first, you sympathize. After all, you know pain. You know how hard it is to climb out of the abyss. So you try harder. You listen, you advise, you shoulder some of their burden in the hopes that it will lighten their load. But the more you give, the less they do for themselves. Every time they stumble, you are the one expected to pick them up. Every time they spiral, it is you who must pull them back. And if you ever hesitate, if you ever dare to set boundaries, to take a step back, to say, I can't do this anymore, suddenly you are the villain. Because it was never about healing. It was never about escaping. It was about keeping you close, keeping you tethered to them, trapped in their cycle of despair, locked in a role you never agreed to play. They never wanted to be pulled out of the depths. They just didn't want to be alone in them. And you were the perfect candidate, compassionate, loyal, unwilling to turn your back on someone who claimed to need you. They knew exactly what strings to pull, what words to say, what wounds to expose to keep you right where they wanted you. You tell yourself that maybe, if you just love them enough, if you just stay a little longer, if you just hold out hope for a little more time, they'll find the strength to climb. But deep down, you already know the truth. They don't want to climb. They want you to stay. Because as long as you are there, they never have to face the consequences of their own choices. They never have to take responsibility. They never have to be alone with the reality they've created. And the most tragic part? The longer you stay, the more you start to sink. You were supposed to be their lifeline, but instead, they've become your anchor, dragging you down, inch by inch, breath by breath, until the weight of them is too much to bear. And by the time you realize it, by the time you understand what has happened, you are the one gasping for air, You were never meant to be someone's emotional oxygen tank. The weight of their happiness, their peace, their entire sense of stability, it wasn't supposed to rest on your shoulders alone. But somewhere along the way, it did. Maybe it started subtly, with small requests, little reassurances, the occasional need for comfort. You didn't mind. It felt good to be needed, to be trusted, to be the one they turned to when the world became too much. But need has a way of growing. What begins as dependency disguised as love soon mutates into something far more consuming. At first, you thought you were helping. You listened. You soothed. You became their safe space. And yet, the more you gave, the more they took. Their emotions became your responsibility. Their moods dictated your days. If they were anxious, you were expected to calm them. If they were unhappy, it became your duty to fix it. The unspoken rule was clear. You were not allowed to have problems of your own. Not allowed to break. Not allowed to be anything less than their constant source of stability. You weren't in a relationship. You were in an emotional service agreement. You began walking on eggshells, carefully curating your words, your reactions, your very presence to avoid setting them off. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and the guilt would come pouring in. You don't care. You're not there for me. I thought I could count on you. Their pain, their fears, their insecurities, these things were never meant to be faced alone. Not when they had you. And every time you tried to step back, every time you dared to set a boundary, they saw it as an attack, as abandonment, as proof that you never really loved them at all. But where was your safety? Where was your space to break down, to struggle, to be anything other than their rock? The truth is, you were never given that luxury, because the second you tried to make it about you, the entire structure fell apart. They weren't interested in reciprocity. They weren't interested in supporting you the way you supported them. No, they needed you to be steady, unshakable, always available. Because if you weren't, then what would happen to them? And that's where the suffocation begins. Because you are not a machine. You are not an endless well of patience and comfort. You have limits, boundaries, needs of your own. But those things don't exist in this dynamic. They are dismissed, overlooked, or worse, used against you. The moment you prioritize yourself, you are met with accusations. You are made to feel guilty for simply wanting the same care you so freely give. And little by little, you lose yourself. Your life starts to revolve around them, their problems, their emotions. You stop pursuing your own happiness because it might upset them. You stop making decisions for yourself because they might feel excluded. You stop being who you were before they entered your life because they have made it clear. Your purpose is to keep them from falling apart. And the scariest part, you begin to believe it. This is not love. This is not connection. This is control, wrapped in fragility. A one-sided agreement where one person thrives at the expense of the other. And no matter how much you give, no matter how much you sacrifice, it will never be enough. Because someone who refuses to take responsibility for their own stability will always find a reason to need more from you. So what happens when you decide you are done? When you choose yourself for the first time? The reaction will be immediate, desperate. They will call you cruel, selfish, heartless. They will remind you of all the times they needed you, of all the things you did for them, as if your past kindness has now become a debt you must repay forever. They will pull every emotional string they can, because without you, they will have to face the one thing they've been avoiding all along: themselves. At first, it felt like purpose, like meaning, like the kind of connection people write poetry about. They found solace in you, relief in your presence, an escape from the wreckage of their own existence. You were the calm in their storm, the soft place they collapsed into when life became too much. And you welcomed them with open arms, unaware that the same comfort they craved would soon become your chains. They didn't just need you, they depended on you. Every moment of doubt, every wave of despair, every time their world threatened to crumble, they turned to you. And you, in your unwavering loyalty, absorbed it all. Their pain became yours to solve, their fears yours to soothe. You learned to read their silences, to anticipate their spirals, to prepare yourself for the weight of carrying them through another breakdown. But what started as compassion soon morphed into expectation. It was no longer enough to simply be there. You had to be everything. And so, you shrank. You dimmed yourself to make space for them. You tiptoed around their moods, careful not to disturb the fragile peace you fought so hard to maintain. Your dreams, your passions, your own struggles, irrelevant in the face of their suffering. The balance was lost, if it ever existed at all. Their needs overshadowed your own. Their pain dictated the rhythm of your days. The unspoken rule was clear. You were their refuge, and refuges do not ask for anything in return. But something happens when you spend too long tending to someone else's wounds. You forget that you have wounds of your own. You become so consumed with keeping them afloat that you fail to notice you're drowning. And when you finally do, when exhaustion sets in, when resentment starts to build, when you begin to realize that this is no longer love, but servitude, you make the fatal mistake of asking for space. That's when the mask slips. The softness turns sharp. The dependency turns desperate. Suddenly, you are no longer the savior. You are the villain. The accusations come swiftly, laced with guilt, woven with reminders of all you've done for them. How could you abandon me? After everything I've been through, you're just going to leave? They will paint your absence as betrayal, your need for freedom as cruelty. Not because they don't see your exhaustion, but because they do. And they know that if you leave, they will be forced to face the one thing they spent their life running from: themselves. So now, the choice is yours. Do you stay, convincing yourself that this is just how love works? That true connection means endurance, no matter the cost? Or do you finally shatter the illusion, break free from the weight of their dependence, and reclaim yourself? There's a moment when you realize it's over, when the exhaustion outweighs the love, when the weight of staying feels heavier than the fear of leaving. But still, you stay. Not because you don't see the damage, not because you're blind to the slow decay of your own happiness, but because you've already given too much. You've invested time, energy, effort, pieces of yourself that you'll never get back. Walking away would mean admitting that it was all for nothing, that you poured yourself into something that was never meant to last. And that kind of admission feels unbearable. So you stay. You rationalize. You justify. You tell yourself that maybe, if you just try a little harder, things will change. Maybe if you hold on long enough, the person who once made you feel alive will return. Maybe if you keep sacrificing, keep bending, keep quieting the voice inside you that's screaming for freedom, You won't have to face the reality that this is a battle you've already lost. Because if you leave, then what does that say about you? That you wasted years on someone who never truly saw you. That you fought for a connection that was never meant to be saved. And so, the cycle continues. You pour more into something that only drains you in return. You convince yourself that your suffering is temporary, that things will get better if you just endure a little longer. But deep down, you know the truth. This isn't a rough patch. This isn't something that can be fixed with patience or understanding. This is a prison of your own making, built from the fear of starting over, the fear of facing the emptiness that comes after leaving. You tell yourself that leaving would mean giving up, that all the late nights, the tears, the endless attempts to make it work would be meaningless, that if you stay just a little longer, all the pain will have been worth it. But pain doesn't magically transform into love. Time doesn't redeem what was never meant to last. The longer you stay, the deeper you sink, and the harder it becomes to escape. You stop recognizing yourself. Stop remembering who you were before this person became your world. And yet, the idea of walking away feels impossible, because they still need you, don't they? They still have moments of kindness, moments where the person you fell for resurfaces just long enough to make you doubt yourself. They aren't always cruel. They aren't always distant. And that inconsistency is what traps you the most. You live for the moments of clarity, for the glimpses of love that make you forget the months of misery. You cling to the idea that if you've stayed this long, there must be something worth saving. But here's the truth. Staying in something just because you've already invested so much is like refusing to leave a burning house because you spent years decorating it. It doesn't matter how much time, how much love, how much effort you've poured into it. If it's killing you, you have to go. No amount of history can justify your suffering. No shared memories can make up for the slow erosion of your spirit. Love is not meant to feel like a life sentence. The hardest part isn't walking away. It's facing the silence that comes after. The absence of chaos. The empty space where they once existed. The aching void of starting over with nothing but yourself. But that silence is not your enemy. That void is not your punishment. It is your freedom. It is the space where you rebuild, where you remember who you are outside of the role you were forced to play. It is the moment you take your power back. And one day, after the dust has settled, after the echoes of their voice have faded, you will look back and see the truth you were too afraid to face before. You weren't losing them. You were finding yourself again. And no amount of time, no amount of history, no amount of investment will ever be worth more than that.